Namaste, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Considerations Towards Strategy and Tactics for a Combination Device Clinical Trial. My colleague Chad Quistad, who has developed and commercialized a number of combination devices during his time in industry, and I are going to discuss the strategic and tactical aspects of this very important category of devices, very complicated rather, in the realm of clinical trials. Welcome to the chat, Chad.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Yeah. Chad, please help us understand what are some examples of combination devices? What regulations apply to these combination devices? And what are the regulatory pathways in the US and in the EU for these devices?
So we're talking about combination products. We're talking some of the more popular ones that you may see out there, auto-injectors. Anytime you see someone auto-inject something into either the back of their arm or into their thigh, that auto-injector, you obviously have prefilled syringes that are classified as a combination product.
Most popular, yeah.
And in the coronary world, one of the big ones is drug-eluting stents. And you have reusable pen injectors. The most popular use for those is for type 1 diabetes or type 2 diabetes, for people who need to take multiple doses within a week. You have drug reconstitution sets for infusions or an injection kits. You have drug-coated catheters that have someone do drug coating on them. And you have more recent technology, on-body automatic software-driven auto-injectors. And so when we talk about U.S. regulations, combination products are defined in 21 CFR 3.2e, which defines the different types of combination products. So you have single entity combination products, where it's pretty much an all-in-one package. A lot of your auto-injectors are an all-in-one package. You have co-packaged combination products. A good example of those would be, say, on-body automatic injectors, where the injector is packaged separately, but it's in the same kit with a co-packaged drug product that's loaded into that device. And then you have cross-label combination products, where you have pen injectors that can be used with multiple different types of insulin. So you have multiple different types on the FDA side. And they're regulated by 21 CFR Part 4. And CFR really breaks it down into, you have your device side regulations. This is 21 CFR 820. And then you combine that with the 21 CFR 210 and 211 for compound drugs, and then 21 CFR 600 for biologics. When you get into the EU, you get into the definitions of combination products, or of their definitions. They don't really call them combination products. Article 1, Section 8 and Section 9, where they talk about devices that incorporate a medicinal substance, which has an action that's ancillary to that in the device, which means that the drug is not the primary mode of action for that system. Then you have devices that include a medicinal support, that the drug has an action principle of that to the device. And then you have devices generally intended to administer a medicinal product. And that's generally the same thing as sort of a cross-labeled combination product here in the U.S., where it's like an insulin pen, where the insulin pen is sold separately, and then you can use any type of insulin drug that's cross-labeled with it as well.
And in the EU, bringing in Article 118 into consideration as well, right?
That's right. So excellent. So when you get into the U.S. too, is the U.S. has just a single pathway when you're talking about the primary mode of action. So when you're getting into the U.S., one of the things in the regulatory strategy is to first determine your primary mode of action. Right. And if that primary mode of action is the drug itself, the drug is doing the therapeutic effect, or the main therapeutic effect. A lot of times there's a gray area, but it's really the one that creates the most therapeutic effect. So you're taking an auto-injector, that would be a drug primary mode of action, because the drug is delivering the therapeutic effect. Or if you say you take and that would be, you just follow the traditional, you go to CDR, you follow the traditional ANDA route if it's a generic, an NDA for a new drug, a BLA if it's a new biologic. And with the device primary mode of action, so take, for example, a drug-eluting stent, the primary therapeutic action is the stent itself, trying to keep the vessel open, trying to prevent restenosis. The drug part mainly reduces the immediate reaction to the device itself and prevents an immediate scarring and reduces the rate of restenosis in the device, and so that the skin can properly endothelialize around the stent as well. And drug-eluting stents have been proven to be superior over regular stents itself. So those are the sort of things you go through with the device, and with those you go through CDRH, and you take the traditional PMA 510K or de novo route. In the EU, you have to do, if it's a device primary mode of action, you have to get a device conformity assessment per Article 52, and you also require a scientific opinion from a notified body of the medical, the MPA. With on the drug side, you need to get the CE mark of the device itself prior to filing your MAA.
Okay. And then, like I was mentioning earlier, under Article 118, there is a notified body opinion process as well, depending on how your device is classified. Great. Well, thank you, Chad. Chad, I want to delve a little bit into your industry product development experience, right? Before we launch into the actual clinical trial design and conduct aspect of things. What are some of the product development related challenges associated with combination devices?
So one of the biggest problems is when, especially depends which side of the business you're coming from, is in the drug world, it's a completely different obstacle when you're talking about just pure drug development. When you get into devices, a lot of companies that I've seen, they've tried in the beginning initially to try to do everything from within. We're going to try and develop a device. We think we know everything. A drug's complex. This device looks simple. We can do that. The biggest problem is they don't know how to write design history file documents in 21 CFR 820. They don't know how to write design inputs. They don't know what a design verification plan is. They don't really understand risk management, because in their world, the drug world, risk management is really process based off ICHQ 9, and risk management device world is ISO 1345. So getting ISO, I apologize, ISO 14971, and they think they know everything, and then when you come in and look at their what they've done, you're going, yeah, they just don't know what they're doing. And so, a lot of times they think it's a much easier thing to go through a device, when you realize the amount of documentation and traceability is a struggle for them to understand how things are traced throughout the system becomes difficulty for them to understand. And also when it comes to the submission part as well, kind of a lot of obstacles were not only companies I've worked in, but in companies I've consulted for, is you'll get a question back from the FDA, and it's a question of, we don't understand what you tested, what your sample size was, what's its statistical relevance, you have your confidence intervals. And that's stuff that typically not in a drug submission. And a lot of times I've gotten the question, and I know exactly what their submission looks like. So I'll ask first, what does your submission look like? And 9 times out of 10, I know exactly what it looks like, and they have to completely redo the device section, at least along the lines where design verification testing is documented. So it's a big issue within a company, and they really have to. My recommendation for any drug company or any device company, if you're a device company, hire drug experts, hire chemists, hire people who have analytical laboratory skills, who understand drug stability and stuff like that. The device world, you're just not going to understand that. Vice versa, in the drug world, you need people that understand how to do technical documentation with all the DHF, but also how you do the conformity assessment in the EU as well. So there are multiple different areas that you'll struggle with within a company, understanding how things are done in the opposite world.
Great. Chad, thank you for letting your experience shine through. That's years of experience that you've tried to summarize in a few sentences there. So, for a combination device, what ducks really need to be lined up to enable a robust clinical trial design and eventual conduct?
The one thing in the device side, in the drug world, you typically don't have to worry about usability. It's just someone either takes a pill or someone, drink the fluid. Specific drug. In the device world, it's really understanding the usability of your system, understanding the human factors behind your system, and designing that device so that the actual user can define it. And in medical devices, you're required most of the time to be doing formative studies, and at least prior to a clinical trial, to do your formative human factor studies ahead of time, understanding those issues, because the last thing you want in a clinical trial is human use issues get in the way of your primary and secondary endpoints. You want to understand your usability. You don't have to do your summative study quite yet. You can do them. A lot of companies just do them in parallel, but at least your formative study is done before you get to a clinical trial to eliminate a lot of the headaches that may occur during the clinical trial. One of the things you need to understand is all the risks involved in your system, starting with ISO 14971, and understanding of your use and design risks. And that could be your hazard analysis, understanding. You can go into individual use errors, it's a critical task analysis. You can do a use FMEA, you can do a design FMEA, you can do a fault tree analysis to understand all the risks. Because the last thing you want to do is any of those design issues or usability issues that you could have caught early on affecting your clinical trial. One of the things is, and I'll go to an example of this in the next question, is early stability studies. Don't wait till your validation batches to do stability. And a lot of drug companies think they can just throw any given drug into any given container and it will work. Like it worked for this drug, so it's going to work for the next drug. That's not true at all. I've seen significant delays in programs because that assumption was made. And luckily, a couple of the programs I've been in, we've been able to do that early and catch the issues early on. Need to ensure what are the big things you're going to get in a submission, at least from the CDRH side, is traceability of components used to manufacture clinical trial product. Anything you do in your clinical trial product has to be commercially equivalent. And and especially when we're talking about complex devices, you're talking about electromechanical autobody injectors that have, 300 to 400, may have 300 to 400 components. You need to understand the traceability of each individual component, even though they might be minor changes. You need to look at not only the individual changes, but the cumulative changes over time, because I've seen cumulative changes over a period of a year that have affected device performance. Even though individually they didn't do anything, but combined together, because they weren't looked at cumulatively, did create multiple issues. And especially when you're dealing with clinical trials with a combination product, especially on the device side, and if you have a device technical team or especially on the device side, for them to be on site during the clinical trials to address any issues on site with not only the clinical trial reps, but with people actually using them to make sure that things are happening correctly, and that if something does go wrong, they can diagnose it on site. Because the last thing we want in design is to have a third party story about it. We want to see hands on what's really going on so we can resolve the issue. So those are some of the main things that you need to do prior to a clinical trial. And so, Jai, what are the sort of the typical challenges from a trial execution standpoint that you want to avoid?
From a meticulous planning perspective,
to ensure successful execution.
Yeah. Well, let me start by stating that challenges associated with combination device clinical trials are actually no different from any other medical device trial. But there are some items, if not carefully planned for early on, can become insurmountable when it comes to the eventual execution. And I'll discuss some of these items at a high level. So, and I think I have a slew of about 5 to 7 items in my mind. So item number 1, specifically for a combination device trial, where one cannot effectively conduct a blinded study relative to the control group because of the design or the device design per se, manufacturers should consider an alternate approach, such as a blind assessment of the clinical outcomes with equally experienced evaluators. Now, this is an important study design aspect, but it needs to be catered for right up front so that the execution bit of it works out as planned. Item number 2. Now, sample size calculation errors is a big one. From my experience as a clinical team lead at BSI, the scientific validity of a study gets severely challenged at the time of regulatory approval due to incorrect sample size calculations, choice of a primary endpoint that doesn't really match the study objectives, and the addition of an interim analysis for early study stoppage without considering the sample size implications. This is a big one, so something to bear in mind. Item 3, ensure that the trials focus on research questions and include appropriate research methodologies that reflect the priorities, in some cases the culture, the needs of the communities or the target patient population that these devices seek to serve. Now, this is critical not only to commercialization, but also to eventual reimbursement considerations. So this needs to be taken care of right up front and rolled in through the strategic aspects all the way to the tactical aspects of the trial. Item number 4, plan for ethics requirements, ethics practices, and ethics approvals across all regions of interest. Obviously, this is key to patient safety and the regulatory pathway associated timelines. That's the important bit here. Item number 5, ensure adequate and timely recruitment of patients to meet sample size requirements. Now, it's very important to be careful in terms of site selection. Also, make sure you identify enough and appropriate backup sites and keep them ready to go, as well as motivated. Easier said than done, but it's an important item. Enrollment strategies and the network of sites become very crucial, and this is important for the sheer conduct of the trial. A couple of items that may seem minor at the onset, but please bear in mind that regulators are asking questions about this and have increased expectations around these 2 items, and that is reporting on diversity in trial populations and inclusivity in recruitment. And the last item I want to say is ensure participation in clinical trials from sites maybe in rural, remote, regional, marginalized, resource-poor settings, and adequate and have an adequate representation when it comes to underserved patient populations. Once again, since regulators are increasingly looking to understand device safety and performance across the entire scope of the defined patient populations. So these are 6 or 7 items that, can tend to get overlooked, and if they are, they become very challenging to be able to present a cogent story to regulators at the final hour. So something to bear in mind. Okay, well, Chad, one last question to you, and I'd like to invite you to share either an anecdote or an instance from your experiences in the past that may be beneficial to our viewers.
Well, I'll hinge on, talking about doing drug stability studies earlier prior to a clinical trial and not waiting a second. So we had an instance where we actually did some testing ahead of time. It was our photostability testing prior to a clinical trial. And the device we were using, it's typically gone through ethylene oxide in the previous use case with another drug, and everything was fine. So when we started in drug stability testing, when we compared it against the sort of the gold standard stability profile, we noticed a spike where a spike shouldn't be. And we had to take it back. We obviously went back into the very smart chemists and analytical scientists within our company to figure out what exactly was causing that spike. We found out that it was an ethylene oxide spike. There was too much ethylene oxide in the drug itself. So we had to figure out how to reduce that. And the device has always met the minimal regulatory standard for ethylene oxide residuals. And we had to actually find a number to reduce that to. And a number that we had to reduce it to was a number that was just right above the limit of detection or quantification, and which made it really hard. And typically with the ethylene oxide, you have to do heat iteration for 2 days. So we had to actually, heat iteration had to be 25 days. So not only we find that issue early on, it took, 3 or 4 months to figure it out, but it also dramatically changed the supply chain of the product where we could, manufacture it and get it out and shipped within a couple of days. And now it would take nearly a month through logistics just to get the part from the date it was manufactured. So luckily we did that study ahead of time and not during post-verification and validation, because if we would have done that during verification and validation, we would have had to redo everything. So that would have been multi-year delay due to the complexity of the combination product.
Excellent. All right. Well, Chad, thank you so much for sharing your experience and for all your pointers as far as, the planning stage and the actual execution of trials for combination devices.
Thank you
very much.
Thank you.